The Hanukkah festival is a celebration where we remember stories of battles, not only on a spiritual level, but also on the literal battlefield. The most popular thing people know about Hanukkah is that they see Jews lighting what we call the Hanukkah, which is this candelabrum, the candles. But the context of Hanukkah is that it was a war of the Jews against the oppressors who tried to destroy our identity, our, let's say, independence, and the Jews came out victorious from those battles. That's why in this video, we'll talk to you about the military aspect of Hanukkah. It's not talked about much, but it's super interesting, and this is a message I think is very relevant for our generation, for what we're living through, and I have the honor of having Rabbi Yosef Bitton here. I've wanted to invite you for a long time, Rabbi. The Rabbi gave you a little taste of the Rav's extensive biography. He is a very prominent figure in the rabbinic and academic fields. He received his rabbinic ordination in Israel, in fact from a figure prominent in Israel's history, Rav Obadiah, for those who know. He was a rabbi in Uruguay and has been a rabbi longer than I've been alive. He has extensive experience in these matters. He also studied at top universities worldwide, including Yeshiva University in New York and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He has his bachelor's degree in Talmud, Hebrew language, and biblical studies from Bar Ilan University, a master's degree from Ben Gurion University, also in the graduate department. Anyway, I could say a lot about Rav, but I would like to mention an interesting fact, something that connects me to Rav. And Rav is also an author. He has several books and articles on academic, historical, and spiritual topics, of course. And I remember that when I was quite young, about 14 or 13 years ago, I read the Talmudic analysis of Cinderella. And for me, this was very innovative. Can you utilizar el esquema de análisis Talmudic, the Jewish framework, for other perspectives? So that's an interesting fact from my childhood. And you can find him there. I will leave a link in the description of this video so you can access the newsletter that Rav has, which is called Alaha.org, where he talks about topics of Torah, Jewish thought, Sephardic history, many broad subjects. It's a newsletter that reaches tens of thousands of subscribers, as far as I know. And Rav, welcome to our page.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
I would like to start with this topic about the Jews and the battles. We know that during Hanukkah, the Jews had very little chance. There were very few of us fighting against many, at the level of military strategy or psychologically and ideologically. How is it possible that the Maccabees, despite these odds, still decided to launch a rebellion against this empire that was oppressing them, that was occupying their land? How is it possible to do this when all the odds are against you?
Yes, well, first of all, Hanukkah Sameach to you and to all the Americans who already have Hanukkah underway. We're going to start celebrating in a couple of hours or so. For the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, we're talking about the year 165 or 166 before the Common Era. There is no difference between the military battle and the spiritual or religious battle, freedom of worship, let's say. King Antiochus, who was the emperor, the one from the Seleucid Empire, a branch of the Greek Empire that ruled Judea and Judah, imposed religious restrictions and banned them from performing Brit Milah and so on. Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and that was what happened. Besides, they wanted to force the Jews to abandon their religion in an active way, like accepting and making sacrifices to other gods, like the story of Hannah and her 7 sons and so on. And for a long time, the Jews said, we will resist. And well, if they have to kill us, they'll kill us. That's what happened in the story of Hannah, for example. It wasn't until Mattathias that someone first who said, no, we are not going to let ourselves be killed. We are going to resist. He resisted a delegation of Seleucids, Seleucid Greeks. The two words are almost parallel in this regard. And it's very important to say this, that this delegation arrived with Mityavnim. Mityavnim were Jews who had already gone over to the other side. And we're not talking about an insignificant number. We're talking about a very significant number and also very important in terms of their influence. Jews who were assimilated, they were assimilationists and turned against the observant ones, who were mostly those living on the outskirts, in the villages, let's say more in the interior of the country. The Mityavnim were more in the cities, which were more cosmopolitan, like Yerushalayim, which were mixed cities. So this was also a kind of not only a war against the Greeks, but also against the Mitiavnim, against the assimilated Jews themselves, the assimilationists. And so Matityahu is the one who makes the decision. And as you said, it's a decision, you could say it's suicidal or desperate, right? And that's why we attribute it to Borei Olam. It's miraculous that we succeeded. Besides, because the Jews, both back then and throughout our history, we never prepared for war. We are not a people who go out to conquer other peoples. We're not the Vikings or anything like that. No, we always defended ourselves. In this case, we were also defending ourselves from being forced to give up our Judaism, right? And well, Matityahu showed incredible courage. At first, there were very few of them. It was just him, his family, his 5 sons, who were very brave and very smart. And I imagine that his relatives or the people who lived near him as well, maybe there were a few hundred Jews. And again, it's the first time in history that a people are going to fight not for their physical survival, but to practice their religious freedom, so to speak. It's the first time something like this happened. So at first they hid after having resisted and attacked the delegation and killed the Greek and Hellenized Jewish delegates who were coming to the city of Modin. They fled to the Judean desert. They hid in the caves and began to attack the Greeks, to resist in a more military way, but like guerrilla warfare, attacking certain units of the army. One of the first battles they won was against Apollonius, who was the ranking officer sent by Antiochus to suppress this small rebellion. And then the Jews attack. A great success in this military battle. Suddenly they had weapons, since the Jews didn't make swords or other weapons. For the first time they were armed. And there Judah Maccabee, who had already taken control, established himself as the head of the Jewish military command. He takes there the sword of Apollonius, which, as he says, is like the sword that David took from Goliath, and he never let it go. In all of this, they are absolutely observant, pious. They pray all the time. They observe fast. They blow the shofar. That is to say, their Jewish identity was everything. And Yehuda Maccabi always quotes from his Kimber, the biblical verses. It's not because of the army or the power of weapons. It's because of the spirit, the inspiration of Borei Olam, the divine inspiration. He was very devout. In fact, history calls them Hasidim, actually, the pious ones. The Mishnah says that their prayers were like a meditation that lasted for hours. And well, we have to understand that this goes hand in hand with also being very brave in military matters, something very uncommon. So Yehuda is the one who leads all of this. Antiochus starts to send, let's say, a larger delegation of soldiers with a lot of intelligence. And Yehuda Maccabi, for example, fights against Ziron, one of the generals that Antiochus sends, and defeats him by attacking him by surprise. Then Antiochus sends first Lysias, who was his right-hand man. He entrusts him with the mission, and Lysias sends 3 generals with 10,000 soldiers. And he sends the soldiers with 3 generals, Nicanor, Ptolemy, and Gorgias. Then they camp in a place called Emmaus. We're talking about Israel, obviously. Then Gorgias goes out with a force of 5,000 soldiers to attack the Jews by surprise in Mitzpah, which is the place where Shemuel Hanavi was. So Gorgias, then the informants come to tell Yehuda that Gorgias is coming. Then Yehuda escapes with his group on the other side, leaves the camp lights on. Gorgias arrives and doesn't find them and thinks they escaped to the mountains. So he goes out to chase them into the mountains. While Gorgias goes out to chase him into the mountains, Yehuda Maccabi with his men, about 1,000 men, arrives at Nicanor's camp. Right? He was one of the generals who was there. And well, before attacking, the men are saying something like, we won't be able to fight against soldiers who are prepared for war, who have modern weapons and so on. So Yehuda gives them a pep talk, as they say, a speech where he motivates them with a lot of Jewish spiritual content, right? And saying again, repeating, it's not about strength, but about the courage that comes from Hashem, that comes from God. And well, they attack by surprise in the morning, kill many of the Jews who are there, and the rest escape. They take the camp, set it on fire, and leave everything like that until Gorgias arrives. And when Gorgias sees the Jews there in the camp ready to face him, he also escapes. The book of the Maccabees is interesting. It says that just to show you what these people were like, they took the spoils of war, and the first thing they did was distribute it among the poor, the orphans, and the widows. In other words, we're talking about Yehudim, about Jewish people with an extreme spirituality and religious observance, something admirable, right? Because if you think about it, you always associate, let's say, bravery in war or courage with a certain roughness. And let's say not with much spirituality or generosity. In this case, that's why I say it's so important, building on what you said, to know this, because that's also the model we want for ourselves and the one we have, right? Our soldiers, the soldiers of the Israeli army, the Israel Defense Forces, we are forced to defend ourselves, but when they attack us, that's where they'll find us. Like the Maccabees, they'll find us. And we know that we are defending not only a piece of land, but also our survival as Jews, right? And well, our Hayalim, Baruch Hashem, have that extraordinary personality, which is also, it's very hard to understand both things. That they are so tough in battle, and inside they are so compassionate and such good people, right? That they do so much good. If you want, I can continue with the battles. Do the Greeks keep fighting?
Yes, yes. That topic, I think, yes, let's continue analyzing this. And Rabbi, while you were talking, I was just thinking about that verse from the prophet Zechariah, Zacharias in Spanish, which says that not by weapons and not by force, but by Hashem, these battles are won. But there really is a tension between what you say. How can it be? Because what comes to mind is that if a person is religious, then they are not violent. But there are times when you need violence in order to keep existing. It's a very difficult tension to, especially for a people like the Jewish people who are not violent. So I would like, if you can, as you explain the historical aspect, to try to explain how this balance looks, because honestly, it's very strange. This is one of the criticisms against Israel today. People say the Jews are this or that, but that's just not true. I invite anyone to talk to the average soldier, to any soldier, and you'll find very kind human beings.
It's very true.
No one calls us to violence, so I think that's a point that if you could develop it as a parallel would be interesting.
That's good. I do that a lot in my writings. I do that all the time. I think you can't look at history without looking at the present, that one thing sheds light on the other, that look, it's like that. Generally, people think that the past sheds light on the present, that the past helps you understand the present, but there's the other side too, also when the present helps you understand the past. For example, how can you understand that the Maccabees were absolutely pious people and what they did? Acts of charity, and at the same time they were, you say violent, I say brave, but maybe they were violent with the enemy. That could be. How can those two things be combined? That's how the present reveals the past. So when you see an average Israeli soldier, you see both aspects. You see someone who in his personal life is an incredible father, an incredible husband, an incredible person who contributes to society, who does good, who volunteers in hospitals, who volunteers in charitable works. And on the other hand, he is a brave fighter who goes all the way and is willing to risk his life to defeat the enemy. I think the main thing is why someone fights. In this case, as I told you before, the Jewish army of Israel has never, ever invaded a country and tried to kill people. Because yes, actually, even now, for example, in this current war, we are still defending ourselves. The world is going to demonize us, among other things, because they don't have this model, so it seems totally contradictory to them. It's a demonization that we're already used to, and it's like the world. Does it condemn Israel when it goes to defend itself then? What options do we have left not to defend ourselves? Sometimes we've done that indirectly or directly, but I think we've already learned the lesson. And in this case, after October 7th, when we were criticized so much, I think the state of Israel and the army gave the lesson that needed to be given, that should have been learned a long time ago. And well, let them say whatever they want. It doesn't matter. That's why our survival is more important, and it is. And well, we went out to attack, and we keep doing it to defend Israel, and well, let them keep demonizing us. That's the price we have to pay. Let them do it.
I never thought about it that way. Like you just said, that the criticism is because that model really doesn't exist. There is no such thing as a defensive army. It's something very innovative from many perspectives. I would also like to pick up on something you said, that never in history has there been a battle with the characteristics of the Maccabees, like a fight for their identity, for their, let's say, ideological freedom. Let's call it religion. Really, I think the Maccabean revolt defined the history of humanity. If the Jews hadn't existed, could the Jewish people have ended there? Would they have assimilated among the Greeks and that's it? But the fact that the Jews continued to exist, that changed the course of humanity, which still has repercussions today in the religious worldviews that come from these kinds of ideas. So I also think it's a very interesting idea, Raf, as we wrap up, because there's a lot to talk about actually for the audience. I want to tell you that Raf has articles precisely about this topic on his website, which I already mentioned. You can look for it in the video description and you can subscribe as well. To wrap up, Raf, is there a final message you'd like to share on this topic?
Hanukkah, as you said, continues to inspire, even today, our soldiers and beyond. I recently wrote about the incredible influence that the battles of the Maccabees have had and still have on the president of Argentina, Javier Milei. It's incredible that in his inauguration speech as president, he mentioned the Maccabees, of course, maybe in a different context. All of his phrases like the forces of heaven, La Libertad Avanza, or the fight for freedom, which he mentions frequently. He takes it from a more political point of view, but not just political. He is literally, explicitly inspired by the battles and books of the Maccabees, and he says it without any problem. I mean, I think this is the message of the Jewish people, that we have fought for our religious freedom, that we know how to defend it, and that we will continue to defend ourselves when we are attacked. We are not a people of war. We don't like war. We don't enjoy the death of the enemy. Quite the opposite. But when they wake us up, there we are. I'm going to tell you a final message that I think is very important, and that also has to do with the present, from a rabbi named Elias de Melamed. Dice que, who shows in his book that the Jewish people are assimilating, right? The Hellenizing Jews were assimilating without any coercion from the Greeks, and suddenly Antiochus, in the year 167, 168, he loses his patience and says, I'm going to force the remaining Jews to assimilate. And that's what makes Matityahu and his sons start the rebellion. Afterwards, was it Baruch Hashem successful? He puts it this way. If Antiochus hadn't lost his patience, possibly from a historical point of view, the Jews would have assimilated. It would have been a matter of time. 20, 25 more years, 50 more years, that's it. Judaism would have faded away, he says. So it was from heaven, it was divine. He compares it to when Hashem intervenes, when God intervenes and hardens Pharaoh's heart, he says. That's what happened with Antiochus. He suggests that his impatience, or that impatience, was of divine origin. Thanks to that impatience, the Jewish people woke up and we achieved what we achieved. I see, for example, parallels with October 7th, 2023, like many Jews here in the United States, for example, who were totally indifferent to the Jews. Suddenly they wake up and reconnect with their Jewish identity. Suddenly they start to become curious about it. So these are very harsh events that happen, and the price is very high, but the way we Jews react to those terrible events is very commendable and positive. So I hope this war ends in a positive way, with more security for Israel, more unity among the people, which is part of what we want to achieve.
Let's hope that Hashem answers your prayers, and thank you to the audience for being here, and greetings, Raf.
Take care. Goodbye.